6 weeks. That was how long the door had been locked. Inside. Maps covered every surface. Telegrams stacked like snow against the lamp. Ledgers sprawled open. Ink-stained pages documenting the expansion that would change everything. The railroad would stretch another 200 miles by spring, connecting territories that had never seen steel rails. Towns would bloom where sagebrush now grew. Fortunes would be made. His fortune, finally. The knock came at 5:30, as it had every evening for weeks. Light, hesitant, a child's knock. "Your father is busy." The secretary's voice carried through the door, practiced and efficient. Inside, the Tycoon barely looked up. He waved one hand dismissively, his attention fixed on the surveyor's report. The northern route would cost more but avoid the canyon. The southern route risked flooding but saved 3 months of construction. Everything hung on this decision. "Sir, your daughter—" "Not now, Harrison." The footsteps retreated. 2 sets Harrison's confident stride and the smaller, slower steps that paused once, twice, then faded down the hallway. He didn't notice when they stopped coming. The late winter light died early these days, gray and cold. Dust gathered on the door's exterior while he conquered territory on paper, claiming land he'd never walked, building connections to places he'd never seen. The office smelled of lamp oil and old coffee, of ambition and sleepless nights. He told himself this mattered. All of it mattered. The railroad would be his legacy, his daughter's inheritance. Security built from steel and steam. Wealth that would outlast him. When other men gambled and lost, his daughter would have an empire. She would never want for anything. He just needed to finish this deal, close this negotiation, secure this territory. Then he'd have time. Then he'd make it right. The lamp flickered. He trimmed the wick and returned to his calculations. Outside, February darkness pressed against the windows. Somewhere in the house, his daughter ate dinner alone. He didn't know what she'd eaten. Didn't know if she'd finished the book he'd bought her for Christmas. Back when he still came home for supper. Had it only been 6 weeks, it felt longer. It felt like no time at all. Harrison entered at 8 o'clock with evening correspondence. More telegrams. More decisions. The Eastern investors wanted assurance. The surveying crew needed approval. The timeline compressed with each passing day. "Anything else, sir?" "Has my daughter gone to bed?" "I believe so, sir, an hour ago." "Good. That's good." Harrison hesitated at the door. "Sir, she asked if you might read to her tomorrow evening. After the Pittsburgh meeting, tell her after Pittsburgh." "Yes, sir." The door closed. The Tycoon returned to his maps, tracing routes with his finger, calculating profits in his head. Outside, the house settled into silence. No small footsteps in the hallway, no light knock at his door. The dust gathered, grain by grain, day by day, while he built an empire and lost what he couldn't measure. He didn't know she'd stopped knocking. He didn't know she'd stopped hoping. Not yet. Ruth arrived at dawn, as she always did. She was a widow, thin and straight-backed, with hands made strong from years of hard work. She cleaned the offices after the clerks left, washed the windows the Tycoon never looked through, swept floors he never noticed. Quiet work, honest work, the kind that made people invisible. But Ruth saw everything. This morning, she paused outside his office door. Something caught her eye in the early light slanting through the hallway window. She leaned closer, squinting. Letters, written in the dust coating the dark wood. Papa, small, uneven letters. A child's uncertain hand. The question mark tilted hopefully, desperately. Ruth stood very still. She touched one letter gently, felt the depth where a small finger had pressed. How long had this been here? 2 weeks. She guessed. Maybe longer. The dust around it had settled thick, undisturbed. She knocked on the door, firm, insistent. "What?" The Tycoon's voice came sharp with exhaustion. "Sir, You need to see something. I'm working, Ruth. I know, sir, but you need to see this now. The chair scraped. Footsteps approached. The door opened and he stood there, disheveled and ink-stained. A man who'd forgotten what daylight looked like. Ruth said nothing. She simply pointed to the door. He followed her gesture, his eyes adjusting. When he saw the writing, something in his face changed. Hardened first, then cracked. How long? His voice came rough. She waited every evening last month. Sir, right here in this hallway. Your secretary turned her away each time. Ruth kept her tone gentle, but the truth needed speaking. She wrote this 2 weeks ago, maybe longer. She hasn't been back since. He reached toward the letters, stopped himself. His hand hung in the air between them. The deal is critical, he said finally. Yes, sir. The investors arrive Wednesday. If I don't close this, the deal is always critical. Sir, the words landed quiet but heavy. He looked at her sharply, then away. Guilt moved across his features like clouds shadowing a hillside. Ruth had seen that look before, on other faces, in other houses. Men who woke too late to what they'd lost. Don't clean the door, he said. Not yet. No, sir. He started to retreat into his office, then paused. Where is she now? Your daughter in the nursery, I expect. She takes breakfast there most mornings. Does she ask for me? Ruth considered lying, decided on truth. Not anymore, sir. That landed harder than she'd intended. She saw it strike him, saw him absorb the blow. But he didn't change course. Didn't walk upstairs to find his daughter. Instead, he stepped back into his office, into the maps and telegrams and ledgers that promised everything and delivered nothing. Thank you. Ruth, you have one chance left, she said quietly. Maybe. He looked at her. Really looked, perhaps for the first time in months, saw the gray in her hair, the lines around her eyes, saw the knowing in her expression, the kind that came from loss. I'll make it right, he said. After this deal closes. Yes, sir. She didn't believe him. He could hear it in her voice, that gentle disbelief. It made him angry, made him defensive, made him want to explain how complicated it all was, how much depended on these next few weeks. But Ruth was already leaving, her footsteps quiet on the wooden floor. The door remained open. The morning light fell across those dusty letters, illuminating his daughter's fading hope. He stood looking at them for a long moment, feeling something cold settle in his chest. Then he closed the door and returned to his work. The deal was critical. It was always critical. But the dust remained, and the question hung unanswered. He couldn't sleep. The house settled around him, quiet and dark. Somewhere a clock chimed midnight. He sat at his desk, papers forgotten, staring at nothing. Memory came unbidden his daughter at 5 years old, climbing onto his knee during a meeting with the Eastern investors. They'd smiled indulgently while she traced the railroad routes with her tiny finger, asking where the trains would go, whether they'd see mountains, whether she could ride in the very front someday. When you're older, he'd promised. When you're grown, you'll ride in your own private car. She'd beamed at him, perfect trust in her eyes. When had she stopped climbing onto his knee? When had she stopped asking about the trains? He couldn't. Remember, the meetings blurred together, one into another. Somewhere in that blur, his daughter had grown from 5 to 8, and he'd missed it. 3 years since Margaret died, the grief had been crushing. He'd wait gasping, forgetting she was gone, reaching for her in the darkness. The house felt wrong without her laughter, wrong without her gentle correction, wrong without her presence softening the hard edges of his ambition. So he'd done what seemed right, poured everything into the work, built something that would last, created security Margaret would have wanted for their daughter. Every mile of track was a promise kept, every negotiation a prayer answered, Every expansion, a monument to what he'd lost. He'd thought his daughter would understand. Later, when she was older, when she could see what he'd built for her. But understanding required presence, and presence required time he didn't have. Not yet. Not while the deal hung unfinished. The critical meeting loomed Wednesday, 3 days away. Representatives from Pittsburgh, from Chicago, from San Francisco. The negotiation that would double his fortune, triple his holdings. Cement his legacy as the man who connected the Western territories. Everything he'd worked for, condensed into one room, one day, one decision. His daughter's question, Papa, written in dust and fading hope, which mattered more, he knew the answer, knew what Margaret would say, knew what any decent father would choose. But the railroad was real, tangible, measurable. He could point to maps and say, I built that. Could leave his daughter an inheritance that would survive generations. The railroad was forever. Childhood was temporary. His daughter would grow, would understand, would forgive. Children were resilient. Everyone said so. He told himself this. He almost believed it. Wednesday's meeting couldn't be postponed. The investors were already traveling, crossing half the continent to be here. Walking away now would destroy everything. They'd give the contracts to Morrison, to Thatcher, to any of the hungry men circling this opportunity. His daughter would have dinner with him Thursday evening. They'd talk. He'd explain. She'd see. Just 3 more days. He gathered the Pittsburgh contracts, organized them by priority. Sleep seemed impossible. So he worked through the night, preparing arguments, anticipating objections, calculating margins. The lamp burned low. Dawn came gray and cold. Somewhere in the house. His daughter woke and dressed and ate breakfast alone. Learning independence he'd never meant to teach. But independence was valuable too. Margaret would have wanted that. A daughter who could stand alone, who didn't need anyone. He repeated this to himself as the sun rose. He repeated it while reviewing contracts. He repeated it until he half believed it. Until he could face the day, and the next day, and Wednesday's meeting without the weight of that dusty question crushing him. Just 3 more days. Then he'd make it right. The lie was easier than the truth. Spring came while he wasn't looking. 6 weeks became 8, then 10. The Pittsburgh deal closed successfully, but 2 more negotiations emerged in its wake. The railroad expanded, connections multiplied. His empire grew until it consumed every waking hour. Harrison still brought evening correspondence at 8 o'clock. Ruth still cleaned in the early mornings. The house still functioned around him, invisible and efficient. His daughter became a ghost in his periphery, glimpsed occasionally through windows. Heard sometimes in distant rooms, present but unreachable. He told himself he'd make time. After the Chicago contracts, after the surveying reports, after the Eastern expansion finalized. Always after. But Ruth didn't wait for after. She arrived early one morning and found the girl sitting alone in the breakfast room, still in her nightgown, staring at cold toast. 8 years old and already learning loneliness. "Good morning, miss," Ruth said gently. The child looked up. Her eyes were her mother's, gray and serious. "Good morning, Mrs. Carson. Have you eaten? I'm not hungry." Ruth sat down across from her. Outside, the March wind carried hints of warming. Birds called in the garden where winter had released its grip. "The crocuses are blooming," Ruth said. "Would you like to see—" The girl hesitated. "I shouldn't bother you. You're working." "Looking at flowers isn't a bother. It's a blessing." They walked together through the garden. The girl still in her nightgown and bare feet. Ruth carrying her shawl. The crocuses pushed through last year's dead leaves, purple and white and yellow, determined and brave. "How do they know to grow?" the girl asked. "They just do. It's in them, waiting. When the time is right, they push through. Even though it's still cold. Even though—" The girl knelt and touched a purple bloom gently. "They're strong." Stronger than they look. Ruth agreed. That became their morning ritual. Before Ruth cleaned, before the girl took lessons from her governess, they walked the garden together. Ruth taught her the names of flowers, showed her where to plant the summer bulbs, explained how things grew. The girl asked questions. Ruth answered. Neither mentioned the father locked in his office, the man too busy building empires to notice spring arriving. But Ruth noticed everything. She saw how the child's eyes went to her father's office window, checking if the lamp still burned, saw her pause outside his door, listening, before walking away, saw her learn to stop hoping, stop expecting, stop wanting what she'd never receive. The change broke Ruth's heart. She'd lost her own husband to fever 10 years ago, lost her son to a railroad accident 5 years after that, a construction mishap on the very line this Tycoon. Now expanded. She knew what loss felt like, knew how it hollowed you out. But this girl wasn't learning loss. She was learning abandonment, learning that love had conditions, that work mattered more than presence, that she wasn't enough to pull her father from his maps and telegrams. Ruth couldn't bear it. So she gave what she could: gentle attention, patient teaching, the steady presence children needed. She taught the girl to plant seeds, to nurture growth, to find comfort in small rituals. And the girl bloomed under that attention, carefully and slowly, like crocuses pushing through cold ground. One afternoon, the Tycoon glanced out his office window and saw them, Ruth and his daughter, kneeling in the garden, hands in dark soil, planting bulbs for summer flowers. His daughter was smiling, genuinely smiling, her face lit with simple joy. He stopped mid-sentence, contract forgotten, staring at that smile. When had he last seen her smile? When had he last given her reason to? The thought disturbed him. But the Chicago representatives waited for his response, and the moment passed, and he turned back to business. Spring deepened outside his windows while winter remained in his heart. Ruth brought wildflowers to his office one morning in early April. She set them on his desk without asking permission: purple lupines and yellow balsam root, spring beauty and wild iris. They smelled of open meadows and honest sunlight. "What are these for?" he asked, annoyed at the interruption. "Your daughter picked them. She wanted to brighten your room." He looked at the flowers, then at Ruth. "She sent these, she picked them. I decided to bring them." The distinction mattered. Ruth's expression made that clear. His daughter had offered something beautiful. Ruth had chosen to deliver it. "Thank them both," he said awkwardly. "You could thank her yourself." "I will." After, Ruth echoed. "Yes, sir?" She left. The flowers remained, defiant and lovely, bringing spring into his winter office. That afternoon, he heard laughter from the garden, his daughter's laughter bright and free, the kind children make when joy catches them unexpected. He walked to the window, drawn by that sound, and watched. Ruth and his daughter were arranging wildflowers in glass jars, their heads bent close together. Talking. The girl said something that made Ruth smile. Ruth responded, and the girl laughed again. That beautiful unguarded sound. He stood frozen in the hallway, one hand raised to knock on his own home's door, suddenly aware he'd become a stranger in these rooms. When had his daughter started calling the widow Miss Ruth with such affection? When had she learned to garden, to arrange flowers, to find joy in simple things he didn't know? He'd been absent for all of it. Later, over cold dinner eaten at his desk, he asked Harrison what the girl did with her days. "I believe she takes lessons with her governess until noon, sir. Then she works in the garden with Mrs. Carson. Every day. Most days, yes." "But what do they talk about?" Harrison looked uncomfortable. "I couldn't say, sir." But Ruth could. And that evening, when she came to collect his dinner tray, he asked her directly, "What happened to your son?" The question surprised her. She set down the tray slowly, considering. "Railroad accident. Sir, 5 years ago this June. He was working construction on the northern expansion. My northern expansion? Yes, sir. The weight of that settled between them. His railroad had killed her son, yet here she stood, cleaning his office, caring for his daughter, showing him grace he hadn't earned. Why did you stay? He asked. After that, why work for me? Ruth met his eyes steadily. Where else would I go? I'm a widow with no family, no resources. I needed the work. You could have hated me. I could have, she paused. Some days, I did. The honesty stung. Good. But your daughter needed someone. Ruth continued. And I've known enough loss to recognize it in others. She lost her mother. I lost my son. We understood each other. So you took my daughter's side. I took the side of a lonely child. There's no conflict there. Sir, just need... He wanted to argue. Wanted to justify his choices, explain the complexity, defend himself. But Ruth's expression held no judgment, only truth. Patient and immovable. She asked me yesterday if you'd forgotten her. Ruth said quietly. The words hit like a fist. What did you tell her? I told her you were very busy. That's true. Truth and comfort aren't always the same. Sir? She left him then, taking the dinner tray, leaving him with wildflowers and weighted silence. Outside, spring deepened. Inside, he sat surrounded by contracts and calculations, building an empire for a daughter who'd stopped waiting for him to notice. The wildflowers wilted slowly on his desk. He didn't replace them. The question came on a Thursday morning. Ruth arrived to find the Tycoon already awake, disheveled from another sleepless night. She hesitated, then spoke. Your daughter asked me something yesterday. While we were weeding the herb garden, he looked up from his correspondence. What did she ask? Ruth chose her words carefully. Why doesn't Papa love me? That's what she said. The silence stretched too long. She watched him absorb it, saw the pain flash across his face, saw him rally against it, saw the defenses engage. That's not I do love her. Everything I'm doing is for her. Yes, sir. The railroad, the expansion, all of it. It's to give her security. She'll have everything she needs. Yes, sir. After this deal closes, after the summer negotiations finish, I'll have more time. I'll explain it to her then. Ruth said nothing. Her silence spoke louder than argument. You don't believe me, he said, anger creeping into his voice. It's not my place to believe or disbelieve. Sir, but you think I'm wrong. You think I'm failing her. I think, Ruth said carefully, that children measure love in presence, not promises. She doesn't understand deals and negotiations. She understands that you're locked in this office while she's learning to live without you. I'm building her future. You're missing her present. The truth landed hard. He stood abruptly, paced to the window, stared out at the garden where his daughter had planted flowers he'd never complimented. What am I supposed to do? The question came raw. Walk away from everything. Let the business collapse. Waste everything I've worked for. What does everything mean if you lose her? The same question she'd asked before. It hit harder this time. She needs security, he insisted. Financial stability. An inheritance that will protect her. She needs her papa. You're oversimplifying. Am I? Ruth moved closer, her voice gentle but unyielding. My son is dead. Sir, I'd give everything I own, everything I am, for one more day with him. One more conversation. One more chance to tell him I loved him. She paused, letting that sink in. Your daughter is alive, she continued, healthy, right down the hallway. And you're choosing ledgers over laughter. I can't tell you what to do. Sir, but I can tell you what loss looks like, and I'm watching you create it, day by day, choice by choice. He wanted to defend himself. wanted to explain the complexity, the stakes, the pressure, but the words wouldn't come. Ruth waited, patient as stone. "I can't," he finally said. "Not now. The summer negotiations are critical. After that, there'll be another critical deal. And another? There's always one more mountain to climb. Sir, always one more fortune to secure. You don't understand business." "No, sir. I understand loss." She moved toward the door, then paused. "She stopped crying yesterday," Ruth said quietly. "Just went silent. Children do that. When hope runs out. They stop fighting, stop asking. They just drift away. She's 8 years old. She'll understand when she's older. Maybe. If there's anything left to understand." Ruth left him then, closing the door softly. He stood alone in his office, surrounded by maps and contracts and empire-building documents. Outside, the spring afternoon turned warm and golden. He could hear birds, could hear children playing somewhere distant, could hear his daughter crying, very softly. In a room he'd stopped visiting, he moved toward the door, hand on the knob. One twist and he'd be in the hallway, walking to her room, holding her, making it right. But the Chicago contracts needed reviewing. The Eastern investors expected responses by Friday. The timeline compressed with each passing hour. He locked the door instead, locked it and returned to his desk and told himself this was temporary. After the summer negotiations, after the expansion finished, after everything settled, always after. The crying stopped eventually. The silence was worse. Wednesday morning dawned clear and perfect. The meeting that would double his fortune, triple his holdings, cement his legacy forever. Representatives from Pittsburgh, Chicago, San Francisco all gathering in one room, prepared to sign contracts worth millions. Everything he'd worked for, reduced to signatures and handshakes. He dressed carefully, reviewing arguments in his head. Harrison had prepared the conference room. The contracts waited in neat stacks, organized by priority. Perfect. Everything was perfect. He walked past his daughter's room without stopping, through the hallway window. He glimpsed her in the garden, reading alone beneath the apple tree, spring blossoms drifting down around her. Ruth must have been busy elsewhere. The girl sat solitary and still, absorbed in her book. Something about that image caught him, the loneliness in it, the acceptance. He paused, almost turned back. But the representatives were arriving. The meeting couldn't wait. He continued downstairs, in the conference room. Powerful men gathered sharp suits, calculating eyes, hands that shaped territories and moved fortunes. They shook his hand, complimented his vision, positioned themselves for advantage. The negotiations began. Northern routes versus Southern, timelines and costs, revenue projections and risk assessment. The dance of men building empires, claiming futures, staking territory. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt hollow. Mid-argument about construction schedules, a memory surfaced his daughter asking, years ago, what color trains would be. "Any color you want," he'd said. "When you're grown, I'll paint one your favorite color." What was her favorite color? He couldn't remember. The man from Pittsburgh was speaking, offering terms, generous terms. Everything the Tycoon had hoped for. But the words blurred. What was his daughter's favorite book? Did she still have nightmares about her mother? What did she dream? About what made her laugh he didn't know. He'd missed it all, buried in these very rooms, negotiating with these very men, building this very fortune. For what? The Pittsburgh representative paused, waiting for response. "Sir," Harrison prompted quietly, "for what the empire would survive generations. The railroad would outlast him, outlast his daughter, outlast everyone in this room. Steel and steam and profit, stretching into infinity. But his daughter was 8 years old. Right now. Today, she wouldn't be 8 tomorrow, or next month, or after the summer negotiations. Childhood was temporary. Empires were forever. But which actually mattered, he saw it suddenly. With devastating clarity, Ruth's cleaned door that morning. The dust writing was gone. Papa erased. The last physical evidence of his daughter reaching for him. Vanished. She'd stopped writing it. Stopped waiting. Stopped hoping. The men around the table waited. Contracts ready. Pens poised. Everything he'd worked for. In arm's reach. His daughter. Drifting further away with each passing second. He stood abruptly. "Gentlemen, I apologize." Confusion rippled around the table. "Sir," the Pittsburgh representative frowned. "We're ready to sign." "I know, and I'm deeply sorry. But I have to leave." "Leave now." "Yes." "Mr. Thornton, this meeting took months to arrange." "I know. I'm sorry." He moved toward the door. Harrison blocked his path. Desperate. "Sir, please. The contracts, give them to Morrison or Thatcher. I don't care." "You don't care, sir. This is your life's work." "No," the Tycoon said quietly. "My life's work is reading in the garden, and I'm about to miss it." He walked past Harrison, past the shocked investors, past the empire he'd built, and the fortune he'd nearly claimed. Walked toward his daughter. Toward what mattered. Finally, she didn't hear him approach. The apple tree's shade dappled across her book, across her serious face. Spring blossoms caught in her dark hair. She turned a page carefully. Absorbed completely. 8 years old. When had that happened? "Hello," he said softly. She looked up. Surprise crossed her face. Then something more guarded. Hope trying not to hope. "Papa." The word, that simple word, nearly broke him. He knelt in the grass beside her, not caring about his suit, about the dirt, about anything except meeting her eyes at her level. "I came for you," he said. She studied him carefully. "You have a meeting." "I left it." "They'll be angry." "I don't care." "You always care about meetings." The truth of that cut deep. "I was wrong," he said, "about so many things. I thought I was building something for you. But I was really just hiding from losing your mother." She said nothing, waited. "I don't know your favorite color anymore," he continued, voice breaking. "I don't know what book you're reading. I don't know if you still have nightmares, or what you dream about, or what makes you laugh." Tears spilled down his cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. "I've been a fool," he whispered. "A proud, frightened fool, and I've hurt you terribly. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry." She watched him cry. Her expression remained careful, protected. "Will you teach me?" he asked. "Will you help me learn to be your papa again, please?" The silence stretched too long. He waited, hardly breathing, giving her space to answer honestly. Finally, so quietly, "My favorite color is yellow. Yellow, like Mama's flowers. The roses in the garden." "The yellow roses," he repeated, memorizing this. "What else?" "I'm reading Anne of Green Gables. Miss Ruth gave it to me." "Is it good?" "Very good. Anne is lonely but brave. She finds a family even though she's an orphan." The parallel wasn't lost on him. His daughter, learning to survive abandonment through stories. "Will you read it to me?" he asked. "Will you show me the parts you love?" She hesitated, still guarded, testing him. "You'll go back to your meeting." "No. You always go back." "Not this time. Not ever again. You're more important than any meeting, than any deal, than anything I could build or buy or claim." "You promise?" "I promise." She studied him for a long moment. He saw her mother in her eyes, that same direct gaze, that same ability to see through pretense. Then, slowly, she moved closer, not into his arms, not yet, but closer. The book starts with Anne arriving at Green Gables. She said quietly, "She's been lonely her whole life." But then Matthew and Marilla take her in, and everything changes. "Will you read it to me? Now, right now, unless you'd rather do something else." "We could plant the summer vegetables," she offered tentatively. "Miss Ruth showed me how—" "I'd like that very much." They stood together. She didn't take his hand. Trust needed earning, but she walked beside him toward the garden shed. Ruth watched from the kitchen window. When she caught his eye, he saw approval there, and relief. She'd given him the chance. He'd finally taken it. Now came the harder work rebuilding what he'd nearly destroyed. But for the first time in 3 years, he felt hope. His daughter showed him where to dig, how deep to plant, which seeds needed sunlight. She spoke softly, carefully, sharing knowledge Ruth had taught her. He listened, really listened, learned her voice again, her mannerisms, the way she concentrated, learned his daughter. Finally, spring became summer, became autumn. Ruth taught them both how to tend the garden, how to listen, how to be family. She showed him the patience children required, the steady presence that built trust slowly. He learned his daughter feared thunderstorms, learned she dreamed of becoming a teacher, like Ruth had been before her husband died, learned she loved poetry but struggled with mathematics, that she collected interesting stones, that she sang when she thought no one was listening. He learned to braid her hair, badly at first, lumpy and crooked, falling apart by midday. But he practiced until his hands knew the pattern, until he could twist her dark hair into something approaching neat. She corrected him gently when he got it wrong, praised him when he improved. They read together on the porch most evenings, Anne of Green Gables, then Little Women, then whatever she chose. Sometimes she fell asleep against his shoulder, the book slipping from her hands. He'd carry her to bed, tuck her in, smooth her hair back from her forehead. Simple things, essential things. The railroad still existed. He still conducted business. But the office door stayed open now, and he stopped working after 5 o'clock. And no meeting ever took priority over dinner with his daughter. The business prospered anyway. Maybe more so, his decisions came clearer when he wasn't exhausted. His judgment sharper when he wasn't consumed by guilt. Ruth became family, not hired help, but grandmother to his daughter, sister in grief to him, the one who'd seen and intervened when intervention mattered most. One October morning, warm with autumn sunlight, his daughter appeared at his study door. "Papa." "Look." She'd written Papa in chalk on the doorframe, playfully now, not desperately. The letters were neat and confident. "Should I clean it off?" he asked, smiling. "No. I like it there." "So do I." When it faded, she wrote it again and again, a ritual of love replacing the ritual of neglect. Each time she wrote it, he felt grateful that she still called him Papa, still wanted him present, still forgave what he'd almost destroyed. They planted bulbs for next spring together, crocuses and tulips, daffodils and hyacinth. His daughter explained which needed shade, which loved sunlight, how deep to dig. "Miss Ruth taught you well," he said. "She saved us." His daughter replied simply, "Yes, she did." That evening, all three sat together as autumn sunset filled the study. Father, daughter, and Ruth. His daughter read aloud while he mended a fence post and Ruth knitted. Ordinary tasks, precious tasks. The dusty door of the locked office existed only in memory now. What remained was warmth and presence and love made visible in daily rituals. The deal still existed, still mattered in their way, but they'd found their proper place in service to life, not instead of it. Outside, the garden prepared for winter. Inside, they prepared for Thanksgiving, his daughter planning the menu, Ruth teaching her pie crust, him learning to appreciate how abundance meant family gathered round a table. "Papa," his daughter said that night, tucked into bed. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm glad you came home. So am I." "Will you stay forever?" he promised. "Nothing could take me away from you again." She smiled, genuine, trusting, whole. He smoothed her hair back, kissed her forehead, left the lamp burning low like she preferred. Downstairs, Ruth was banking the fire. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what, sir?" "For seeing what I couldn't, for caring when I wouldn't, for giving me one more chance." Ruth smiled, gentle and knowing. Children are remarkably forgiving, given half a reason to be. "Still, you gave her what I should have. I gave her what I could. You're giving her what she needed most, her father back. Better late than never. Better late than not at all." He helped her finish the evening tasks, then walked upstairs to his own room. Through his daughter's door, he heard her breathing steady, peaceful, safe. Harvest moon hung full and golden outside his window. The garden slept below, waiting for spring. Inside, family breathed and dreamed and healed. The railroad still stretched across territories, connecting places, building futures. His empire still existed, but his legacy lived here, in this house, in his daughter's trust slowly restored, in love expressed rightly, finally, in presence chosen over empire, in the simple word Papa written in chalk, renewed each week with joy instead of dust and dying hope. Some fortunes couldn't be measured in steel and steam. Some wealth grew only in gardens and hearts and moments reclaimed from nearly too late. He'd learned that. Finally. And that knowledge that hard-won, dearly bought understanding was worth more than any deal he'd ever closed. Worth everything.